Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of all of living nature, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising today as we commemorate Earth Day, which has become a global celebration every April 22nd. It was begun actually back in 1970 after Senator Gaylord Nelson of the US Senate and Congressman Pete McCloskey, who was in the House of Representatives, had become so concerned about the environment that they realized that they needed to do something to attract students and public attention to the environmental concerns. There has been a big oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara in California, and there were other environmental degradations going on around the world. So they identified a young activist named Dennis Hayes, who was very young at the time, but full of fire about the environment. It's worth remembering that Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, had come out in 1962, and that was really the first book that alerted governments and the public about the fact that the environment was being spoiled and humanity needed to do something. So this was an impulse that came out of a very few number of people. But Dennis Hayes, who became one of the great environmentalists of our time, took this idea and on April 22nd, which was right at the end of student break but before the exam season started at the American universities, declared Earth Day. And it was a shot heard round the world, as they say. And as the years have traversed over the last 52 years now, Earth Day has become really the first global holiday or commemoration that is collectively held by human beings everywhere around the fact that we are Earth, we are nature, and that what we do matters and has an impact. And that's one reason why I have the trees in the background here, that we are symbiotically related to the trees. Every breath we breathe in comes from the oxygen that the trees and the plants emit. The carbon dioxide that comes out, they breathe in. We're in a symbiotic relationship with all of nature, out of which we came and back to which we all go. So welcome to Earth Day. And today we have a very, very special program that's going to bring some footage, hopefully live, from the Arctic Circle, from an isolated little archipelago there called Svalbard. And we'll get to that in a moment. But let us just pause as we commemorate this day and center yourself in your body. And close your eyes if you can. And attune yourself with your heart. And for the next minute, in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving through your heart, commune with the earth. Feel love for the mother. We are all her children. Thank you, everyone. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Arctic Art Project Research, Carrie Kepping, who is a scientist and an activist who has published many articles and for the last number of years has been leading the Arctic Art Project that we'll be looking at in just a few minutes. And also Andrea Sparrow, who's the executive producer of the Arctic Art Project, who's an artist, also a scientist, and both of them are just passionate about this, what's happening in terms of climate change in a small little isolated archipelago in the Arctic Circle that I'd never heard of actually until we met, called Svalbard. So Carrie and Andrea, welcome to Humanity Rising. And why don't we just start maybe with you, Carrie, and then you, Andrea, just to give us a reflection on Earth Day and what it means to you, and maybe the story of how both of you ended up so passionately attached to an archipelago in the Arctic Circle.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for having both of us. We're excited to share this special day, and Earth Day. As you were talking about Dennis, I got to thinking about my first Earth Day. I was a student at the University of Colorado studying environmental design, and we were celebrating a new era in passive solar and some work that we were doing with SERI at that time, which is Solar Energy Research Institute, and now it's a whole different NREL. But it was fun in the late 70s to take up this cause, and really it became a pattern of life instead of just a day. Mm. And so here we are, a long time later, 45 years later, continuing to celebrate. But really, back in the 70s, we had no idea the depth and the importance that Earth Day would become, especially the work Arctic Arts does. And we're excited to share with you, and hopefully we've got some of our team on the ground in Svalbard that you mentioned, and we'll get to that, but we'll see how much we have to pivot. There's some weather issues going on in Svalbard, which can be expected. But,
well, it is the Arctic.
It is the Arctic, so you never know what's going to happen.
Andrea, tell us your relationship with Earth Day and these matters.
Well, it's interesting when you were sort of introducing that idea about being, expressing gratitude and love for Mother Earth. I don't always refer to it that way, but I feel it that way. And I actually get a little choked up when I think about these things this way, because, we've got nothing else. This planet and caring for it is one of the greatest challenges we have in this time, and really learning to have more than just gratitude and love, but actually a deep compassion for the natural world and those systems is something that I find great meaning in, and also great challenge in our times. So Earth Day is an important day to highlight these things. But as Carrie said, like every day for me and for the people of our project is essentially Earth Day.
Yeah. Well, as I'm remembering back, because I was a student in the 1970, and I remember before that time, not having any real awareness of the environment or the earth. And I heard about Earth Day happening. And I was at the University of Santa Clara in California at the time. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, I never thought about that. I wonder what they're going to do. But I didn't think much more about that until I bumped into Rachel Carson's book. And then all of a sudden I woke up to, there's a problem, Houston.
Yes, exactly.
And so your passion, Andrea, is it burns in, I think, almost all of our hearts today. As it's not just a minority. I think most people are concerned, and the fact that you have spent your time so passionately around what's going on in Svalbard as a little microcosm of the consequences of global warming. So why don't we just dive in, and you all just tell us about Svalbard, tell us about the Arctic Art Project research, and see if we can connect with the Arctic Circle. Over to you.
As we were touching base before we got started, we were talking about how the project became to reality. And it's an interesting story that as visual communicators with a connection to the earth, we're aware of what's happening around us. And more than a decade ago, we were fortunate enough to be up on Denali, largest peak in North America. And for those of you who don't know, Denali is only clear from the clouds. You can only see Denali about 25% of the time. And so we were on a ridge making our climb up, and Denali was clear, but we came across this very unusual set of beautiful patterned mounds going across this ridge. And at that time, you're thinking, wow, that's really beautiful, but it's ironic. And Andrea's putting it up for us. And you've got Denali. Denali is actually off to my right, but you've got these beautiful patterns and trying to figure out, okay, what is this? And so the guide that we were with is a little insulted that we're not photographing Denali, but these mounds. And the realization that we as visual communicators tend to see things that a lot of people may miss because they're looking for the big and the dramatic, but we're aware of things that maybe don't seem right. It's a little out of context to see this. So we took this back to our friends at University of Colorado, Colorado State University, to try and find out really what were we seeing, and the joy of coming across and going, this was permafrost in its first form that we were aware of. I didn't even know what permafrost was at that point. But the realization that we could communicate to the science community what we were seeing as visualists was amazing. I mean, it allowed us to really understand the connection between us as communicators and the science world. And so we began this relationship with the science world at University of Colorado in really trying to put together the things of how do we put the visuals to the science of climate change. At that time, nobody used the word climate change or climate chaos. It was global warming. And was this a product of global warming? And we were trying to figure out what that really was. So that began the Arctic Arts Project as we know it today. And really facing the things that we're seeing now, climate chaos is currently the biggest environmental threat to humanity that we've ever faced. And nowhere on the planet is it more in danger than the Arctic. And do we have visuals going on?
I'm working on it. It's being a pain. 1 second. There, now it should let me do it. Here we go.
All right, yeah, we've lost Jim. Okay.
There.
So within the Sentinels, of changes around the world, we have played witness to some of the most dramatic, timely changes anywhere on Earth up in the Arctic. And our team has been part of everything north of latitude 66. That's the Arctic Circle. And we've been to Greenland, Svalbard, Norway, Russia, Canada, the US, all the Arctic states have been part of this team's effort to really bring the voice of the Arctic to the world at large. And we work with individuals, communities, businesses, policymakers around the world to inspire and educate and promote action surrounding climate change. And we have coined this phrase, visual literacy, within our work. And what that is we all know the greatest tool maybe that Earth has to connect is the cell phone. And we have come across indigenous in the polar regions that have a cell phone but don't have access to running water. And yet they can tell you the latest fashion trends in developed countries. They can tell you what's going on with the latest celebrities. So we have this ability to communicate science through a visual form, whether it's ice or melt or drought or changing weather patterns, changing habitats, changing ecosystems. All of those things come to us in a visual form. And so what we do is work with the scientists and say, what's the latest evidence? What's the latest study that's going on? And then put that out there to the world at large. So we really, by understanding climate change and the solutions and the adaptations that are needed, we give people a sense that it's real. It's not something that is happening someplace that they will never see or never be a part of. But by understanding how we're all connected, it provides the viewer the understanding that it's relevant to their life. And how many times do we think, wow, this storm, this change in ecosystem surrounding me is really caused by something in ground zero north of 66 latitude. It's really kinetic evolution that we're all playing witness to. And this evolution is now pushing at a significantly more rapid rate than it was like we were talking about in the first Earth Day. So what we're seeing right now, some of the visuals you're seeing right now were part of a tour at Eki Glacier in Greenland, where we were seeing a massive amount of calving. Calving is where ice calves off from a glacier that meets the water, meets the sea. And so you're seeing some amazing footage that we captured via our drones that really tells an amazing story of loss and how rapid it's moving. So what we're trying to communicate on a global basis is that we can engage a viewer not only in what's happening, but the beauty of a given scene. And to understand that beauty in science can correlate with one another. And it's not just a bunch of numbers. It's something both artistic and scientific, and that by communicating the depth of this beauty, people can get a connection to Earth that maybe they've never had. And by that connection, they can take on ownership of their own actions and what will happen as we progress through climate change and the tipping points that are fronting us. So we want to inspire and challenge people to cherish the ecosystems that not only surround them, but of the planet, including the Arctic, as we all depend on it. One of the things that, quote that Andrea and I and the team use quite often is John Muir's quote, where the more you drill down on any one thing, the more you realized it's hitched to everything else in the universe. And as we're fortunate enough to be north and see this polar region and the amazing beauty within it, we understand deeply how everything that we're playing witness to is connected to the rest of the earth. And it's a gift that we hold dear to us, that we get to communicate to the people at large the importance of what's going on right now and the beauty in there and how deeply we all need to take action.
Carrie, I'm going to talk a bit now about, you guys are seeing a lot of images from the Arctic in general, which we spend an enormous amount of time up there. We have this incredible team of collaborators who are documenting the science on every level in the Arctic. And the Arctic is warming about 3 times faster than the rest of the planet. This little archipelago called Svalbard, which is a Norwegian territory, is warming 7 times faster than the rest of the planet. There's only about 2,600 people that live on Svalbard, and the polar bear population in the area is actually about 3,000 bears. So there's more bears than humans there. It has the highest richness in species diversity of anywhere in the Arctic, which, you know, the Arctic does not have deep food webs and so forth because it's hard to live there. So that's saying something. And we're interested in Svalbard because given how quickly it's warming, it really is a canary in a coal mine for what climate change can do in terms of altering a landscape and changing the way of life for everything that lives there. So I want to just paint you a picture of this place, of what it's been for thousands and thousands of years. And then I'll tell you more about what's happening there now. So typically Svalbard is a land of ice and snow much of the year. There's about 241 days out of the year on average that the temperature is below freezing. So it's cold, and people use the sea ice that gathers around these islands to move around, as do the animals, because the ice comes in and it sticks to the land, and it's a reliable source of transport. So polar bears use it for hunting, seals use it for their habitat, walrus. It's a critical piece of the world there. Reindeer. Oh, there's Oscar. We're trying, you guys, to bring you a live stream from Svalbard, but I don't know if it's going to work.
They have a blizzard going on right now.
I think I have to tell them to let it go. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work.
It's not going to work, Andrea?
I don't think so. We have to, I'm telling him we have to stop. It's too loud. Okay.
Just listening to the sounds there is amazing.
Oh, there they are. Oh, can we
let's
put them
try.
on?
Let's
Oh,
try.
yeah, there they are.
Can you put them on? There. Oh, they went away.
Oh, we lost them.
There they are. Hi, boys.
Hello.
I can't hear you. I don't think we can do it. I think we have to.
Can you see anything behind us here? There is lakes behind us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are a little bit unlucky with the weather today. We have had some beautiful weather and some bad weather, and obviously when we're trying to make make a live stream the weather turns bad again.
I don't know. I think we might have to boot them.
Just watching them is a beautiful thing.
I know they can't hear us at all.
Oh,
So it's like huge winds and whiteout conditions. They're so great to try to call in to talk to us.
We get everybody in the chat saying, keep trying. I love it.
Oh, that's fun. Okay, well, let's give them a minute.
Yeah, if you guys can hear us, we're not sure. We are here in Permafrost in Svalbard. This is a neighboring fjord of the fjord that you have seen images from. We're not really working in this fjord as the sea ice here is not really the right conditions for the bass habitat. But we have been having a few bass around in the Dixon Fjord in the neighboring fjord, and we had some really stunning night the other day. We had a bear still hunting for about 12 hours. We were waiting for her. Yeah, 12 hours. We had a 25-hour night out, and we just had to stay out and see what was happening. Do you hear us?
Can you hear us at all, Oscar? No.
Seems like there is a delay. Yeah.
Oh, maybe. Okay.
I think we will try to move around a bit and see if we can find a better signal, and maybe we rejoin if we find a better signal. Is that okay?
Yep. Perfect. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi,
Hi, everybody.
Well, that's Oscar and Florian, who are in Svalbard, actually working for the Arctic Arts Project for us. Florian is one of our collaborators and an absolutely astonishing drone photographer. He's been all over the Arctic, and he's worked with all the big companies. So he's actually, his footage is in a new Disney movie coming out in the next couple of days called Polar Bear. So he's been on Svalbard a lot the last couple of years filming. And we had a great plan for a live stream for you guys. And 2 days ago, they had this perfectly calm, beautiful weather, and they look like J. Crew models out there. But what you're seeing now is more realistic for what their lives actually entail.
And I saw in the chat that people are wanting to see the map of where they are. So
yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, you can talk about where they are.
So you can see Longyearbyen on Svalbard there, and they are sort of north of there in the fjord
right
system.
Here.
Yeah, that you can't really see the individual fjords, but there's loads of fjords, and the ice comes in there, and the bears and the seals tend to hang out in those fjords on this side of Svalbard. The east side of Svalbard is where a lot of the females make their dens. And so we had actually hoped to go to the east side we were hoping to be there now. But the east side, there was a huge melt day in March, and the sea ice broke up like months in advance of when it's supposed to, basically. And so that was that. There was no way to get in there to see the bears and to film the mother bears and the babies. So Florian and Oscar are working on getting us footage for our next, well, actually for a couple of films. We're doing a film about ice loss around the world. And then we're also doing a film on Svalbard specifically. So they're working on that. I'm going to quickly share with you guys the bear that they've been talking about, because we actually have footage of that guy. Hold on one sec. Let's see. Okay, sorry, I'm not very good at this whole Zoom thing, but there, now I can share. This is the bear that they've been watching. I think this one's a male, and what Oscar has told us is that they actually there's doing a lot of documentation. There's a lot of study of the bears on Svalbard because unlike most polar bears, they don't move around. They live in this area and they stay in this area. So this bear has a black marking on his butt there, which you'll see. And that's so that from a helicopter or from a distance, they can tell that this bear has been, they tranquilize them and they test their body fat for chemicals and how much body fat they have, and a bunch of other tests to essentially check the health of the bears. They put radio collars on the female bears, but they can't put them on the male bears because apparently their necks are bigger than their heads, so they get them off all the time. So they've been keeping track of this bear. Right here, he's watching a seal hole. He's waiting for a seal to pop up for air, which is basically what they do all day to eat, is capture seals. And I guess Oscar and Florian watched this guy for 12 hours waiting to see what would happen. And no seal ever arrived, but they got some beautiful footage of the bear in the meantime. But it's really incredible. So as you can see, this is sea ice that this bear is on right now. So, and this fox also. And so it's just a layer of ice that holds fast to the land and then is covered with snow. And it's critical for travel for all of the animals and the humans that live on Svalbard. One of the biggest changes that's happened as a result of climate change is that the sea ice is melting much more quickly. Svalbard has about 2 months less of winter than it did 40 years ago, which is significant. And it causes stress to all of these animals when that sea ice breaks up. And the sea ice also does not come down nearly as far as it used to. It used to surround the entire eastern side of Svalbard and come down, south of that. It no longer does. It comes about halfway down the archipelago, but the whole southern side doesn't get the sea ice anymore at all. And then that ice retreats very, very quickly in summer, which is stressful, particularly for polar bears, because their hunting ground is that ice. And so they have been adapting. One of the things they do now is they actually have started killing reindeer, which they didn't do before, because they're having to find a new food source that's on land. The other thing they're doing is they're raiding nests of some of these birds. And so a lot of bird populations are actually doing better in climate change scenarios. Several are not. But the polar bear pressures on nesting birds is going to be interesting to see as things move on. One of the other major changes that happens with warming climate, and the reason Svalbard is so warm, let me explain that briefly, is because the Atlantic currents from the south are getting warmer and they are moving further north. And so it's melting the sea ice from beneath, as well as warmer air melting sea ice from the top. And so the ice gets thinner. As it gets thinner, it gets darker. As it gets darker, it absorbs more of the sun's energy, melting it even more quickly. And so there's these feedback loops that happen. That's Oscar there on the screen now. Feedback loops that happen, which is causing the ice to deteriorate extremely quickly there. And then the other thing that happens is there's more precipitation and more of what scientists refer to as rain on snow events. And so in the winter, it will warm up enough where the precipitation becomes rain rather than snow, and then it will cool off again. But what happens then is there's a layer of water that freezes, and reindeer and fox can't get through that ice to forage beneath it. The reindeer need the plants, the fox get to the small animals that live underground. And there's a direct relationship to the populations, the following, sorry, I'll figure this out, I swear I will, to the populations the year following a rain on snow event. for reindeer and for fox. And interestingly, the reindeer, it's actually impacting the males more than the females. So the ratios between male and female, they're getting more and more female rather than male reindeer, which will also have interesting implications in the future.
Hey, Andre, you want to bring up the interview we did with the guys on the ground?
Sure.
And while she's doing that, one of the things that Andre is talking about in terms of changing sea ice patterns, ocean temperatures, ocean currents, we talked a little bit about relevance. You know, what's happening in Svalbard actually affects the coast of Africa and the currents therein. So as you get changing currents, it's warmer in Africa, and that current change is actually changing the way we in North America get hurricanes, because they come from that African coast. So really, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, it affects all of us, and it comes around from Africa all the way back to the Gulf Coast. So
okay, here's the video we took. This is what we were hoping would happen. In this, we were just doing a test on Wednesday to see if it would work. And we actually got one of our other colleagues in from Greenland. And so Steve is also here, or he's in Greenland. He works in Iceland usually. So we had a lot going on Wednesday, but the weather was much better. So let me share this with you guys.
Crazy to have Greenland and Svalbard in the US all on the same video. This is amazing.
That's cool. I said, what are you going to do now that you're stuck for a couple days?
Well, I'd like to say I was going to go on more expeditions and things, but it's most likely going to be a bit of office work and catch up on everything I've been missing for the last week out. But maybe we go out on the dogs probably, and you know, we're filming as well, so we need to capture more dog sledding and, you know, going to the sea ice edge, and a lot of hunting as well. So capturing shots of seals and, you know, how they are surviving here basically and how their culture is. So it's maybe not so in line with environmental protection, but, you know, these are people that care about the land and live off the land, and they talk a lot about the sea ice and, you know, how important the sea ice is for their culture, and, you know, it's all connected. It's only 55,000 people here, and they really definitely want like better ice, and, you know, that's why we're going out and exploring these fjords, you know, in a crazy fashion, to be honest. Like, it's just, they had to adapt really quickly from going out on dog sled and just hunting seals to using boats and finding techniques to break through like semi-fast pack ice and, you know, scraping past all these icebergs and everything to get to their hunting grounds. So,
hey, Oscar, you and Florian have got amazing light. Oh my gosh, it's like beautiful. Show me the other side of you guys. What's the sun look like on the horizon?
Yeah, it's nice light tonight. So we might, once the footage are sent, we might just continue and find some nice things to film.
Great clouds for the evening.
There's a bear, but she was sleeping with a cup of the year, so and we had to come here for the footage, which is a long way out. But yeah, I might try to find her again and see if she's awake.
Yeah, so she's hunting.
That's absolutely beautiful. Wow.
Do you guys know who marked the bear that you were watching yesterday? You said he had a black mark on him because he's being watched by scientists or someone. You know who's happened to know who's watching him or marking them?
His name is North.
Oh, you know the name?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, and who's marking him and keeping track of him?
Yeah, well, it's his project. So his name is Jon, Jon.
Oh, that's the guy. I thought you were saying it was the bear's name.
And he works at the Norwegian Polar Institute. You will definitely find information on the project online, what they do, what they want to do, what they're tracking. So on the females, they put on these satellite collars so that they can see where they're going. And they also, you know, they tranquilize them. They make tattoos under the lip. They put ear tags in the ears. And then they measure them, the length and the weight, and they take blood samples and fat samples for what do you call them? Environmental chemicals like poison in the PCBs.
Yeah.
And obviously they track them and see where they're going. They get information how often they're in the water, if they're in the water more now when there's less ice, if they sleep more, how long they are inside the dens, etc., etc. And also they get multi-year data on you know, how many cubs they get and how many cubs survives and what happens to the cubs after a while, so they can sort of track the family trees down the line. They've been doing it for, I'm not sure how long they've been doing it for, maybe 15 years, 20 years.
Oh, wow. And then they mark the males just with a black mark to know that they're keeping track of them?
They mark all the bears that they tranquilize because they don't want to tranquilize the same bears.
Right.
So if they're flying here for 4 or 5 weeks and they are in the helicopter, they won't recognize the bears if they have tranquilized them yet or not.
So that was a male because it didn't have a collar on?
So the male has a really thick neck. So the neck is thicker than the head. So the collar would just slip off.
Oh.
So they can only put the satellite collars on the females. But it's not for them to see if they have a collar on from the helicopter. And also the collar could be from last year, but they have to exchange the batteries and, you know, sometimes they have to exchange the whole collar. So it's not enough to see that the bear just have a collar to know that you have tranquilized it this year. You have to have a mark to see that you tranquilized it this year. And obviously then when the bear is fledging its fur, gets new fur, the mark will disappear again.
Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Great seeing all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Well, so you guys got the idea there. It was a little nicer on Wednesday. And that's Oscar has been a guide in Svalbard for 17 years. So he knows the country like the back of his hand, and he's able to help us with logistics and finding locations. And he's great at finding the bears and helping us document all the other pieces on the islands there. Let's see. I don't know. I guess I've probably talked enough about Svalbard for the most part. I mean, I will say this. I don't want to be all depressing, but it is Earth Day and we're thinking about these things. By 2100, it's expected that the sea ice will no longer be around the islands at all in the summer. They actually expect the entire Arctic before 2100 to be sea ice free in the summer. Which will have massive impacts on a lot of creatures, from the phytoplankton that survive right around the ice, all the way up to the apex predators like polar bear. They expect precipitation and particularly rain to increase by 45 to 65%, which will impact the reindeer and the other animals that live in the tundra. It's expected that the permafrost is going to decrease by near surface. So the stuff that's up closer to the surface will decrease by 35% by 2500, which is good from the standpoint of plants. More plants grow when the permafrost is not frozen, but it increases an enormous, it releases an enormous amount of CO2 and methane when permafrost thaws, which then adds more heat to the air. And so we're not talking about saving Svalbard by any particular action. There's actually, Svalbard is the perfect example because you can't save Svalbard without saving the rest of the planet. You have to decrease the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere around the entire planet in order to cool everything enough that Svalbard does not continue to have these effects, right? So we get to see what happens when there is 7 degrees of warming over historical averages, and that's actually Celsius. So it's about 13 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on average in the winter there than it was in 1971. That's a lot. And we can see what happens to ecosystems and everyone in them with that level of warming. And that's not something we want to have happen around the planet. And so Svalbard gets to be a poster child. And if we can take sufficient action in a timely manner, we can actually preserve this place, right? But that does mean action on a global level. And it means huge amounts of carbon not going into the atmosphere. And it also means pulling enormous amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere through forests, maybe through some direct air capture and other things, but really it's about natural systems being able to absorb carbon for us. But we have to stop putting so much out there. So I find Svalbard to be a very motivating place in this way, because it's incredible. It is irreplaceable. And the only way to save it is to save everything.
And I think that that's really the key to our entire team is, where do we find hope in the midst of very dire news that we play witness to? And I think as we progress in our work, the motivation to add a hope component, a challenge to people to be involved and change their own way of life to affect the planet, to affect others, really becomes our motivating factor. So every one of our films now has a hope component, a solution piece to it. So that's really important for us to focus on. And I want to share, if everybody can go to arcticartsproject.com, that's our website, and you can see our films and so forth there. But I'm going to share with you our actions page, just to kind of give a little bit of insight of what everybody can do. And hang on. All right. Are we there?
You are.
Yep.
So, you know, in here, we've got, again, scientific-based visuals, scientific-based actions. And really what we want to leave is people with not an overwhelming solution, because there's this, this fear factor of, am I going to have to change my life so much that it will affect who I am, my identity, my community? And short answer is yes, you do. But what we're trying to do is do it in a way that provides people an understanding that it's possible, that it's really not that difficult to make significant changes. And if everybody's community started embracing simple changes, then we work from the single person to the community. And as you start working your way down the website, you'll see it's a bigger picture. It's talking about government, business, personal, to where everything is connected and we all have to be accountable for our own actions. So feel free, we'd love to have you. There's carbon footprint guides, there's different sources for you to understand what's going on globally. There's a lot of really good actions happening. We've interviewed some carbon capture amazing teams out of Iceland. Andrea's working on an incredible film on forest carbon sequestration that is huge. It'll be coming out soon. We've got a lot of really dynamic, easily accessible actions that you can take. So anyway,
thank you so much, Carrie and Andrea. That's been marvelous. And especially the two gentlemen coming in, even though it was technically challenging. Yeah. It was just wonderful to presence them in our community. So I really want to thank you for setting that up. Let's see, let's start with a question that came from one of our viewers, Carol Sue Engelman, which I think is pertinent to the Arctic Circle. She was asking the relationship between the shifting of the North and South poles and global warming in terms of shifting where it's coldest, you know, on the top of the Earth as the North Pole moves around. I thought that was an interesting question, given the fact that we're dealing with the Arctic Circle. What would be your comment on that relationship between global warming and the shifting of the poles?
Yeah, we get that question a fair amount. And ironically, the scientific basis for that is we should be in a cold period. Earth should be, just because of its position to the sun and its tilt, should be in a cold period. And here we are in a warming period. So patterns that have been within nature for hundreds of thousands of years really are not playing out as has been historically based. So what we're seeing is a shift into a new science. It's making us aware of all kinds of things that are happening that really shouldn't be happening. And some of that is based on our studies with ice core samples. So we're seeing ice core samples that go back 100,000 plus years, and understanding the dynamic between the changes, not only close proximity or further from the sun. Here's what natural cycles should look like, and as they change and are different than they should be, there's also a scientific reflection on what's happening now. So good question.
Yeah, and a related question, I think it would be good for all of us to learn more detail about what you were both alluding to. I think you first, Carrie, when you were talking about, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And your point, Andrea, that you can't solve Svalbard unless you solve everything. So, I mean, just lay out it with more granularity, how global warming is shifting our weather and our climate, from the Arctic to Africa to here. Just talk more about that, because it's intricate, but it's also deeply informative.
Well, and a lot of people don't understand it, right?
Yeah.
So
lay that out.
Okay, in the most basic way that I know how. Warming air causes more evaporation to happen from the oceans, creating that changes storm patterns, but it also ocean currents are starting to shift because of this, because more water, cold water is going into the oceans in some places, cold fresh water, which starts slowing down some of the big ocean currents and starts shifting those currents. And then that starts changing the great wind patterns that we have, those jet streams that move around. Those oscillations are getting greater. And so you're getting massive shifts in where weather goes because of those wind patterns. And then you're getting massive shifts in where warm water goes because of the ocean currents. And so when warm water travels north to a place like Svalbard, where essentially the Atlantic Ocean is now entering the Arctic areas, which is also happening in Greenland, you start where fish live changes, where whales go changes, like all these huge migratory patterns start shifting. When you get warmer temperatures, spring comes earlier. And so like particularly in the Arctic, for example, you're getting shifts around plants are blooming, but their pollinators haven't arrived yet because they're timed differently, right? They're timed to different signals. And so there's a mismatch, which can then decrease diversity in the plant life because it's not getting pollinated, right? So you can't get warming in one part of the planet and keep it there. And as soon as you start losing the cooling effects of those polar caps, you get massive changes that cascade down through weather patterns, through those ocean and wind currents. The most basic way of putting it, I think.
Carrie, what would you add to that?
Well, I think, there's little microcosms that we all can understand in our own world. I live in Colorado, and Colorado is seeing just a dramatic shift in weather patterns, but it's manifest itself across the board. So, we had forest fires that took out 1,000 homes in Boulder, Colorado, at the end of December. Well, that's caused by high winds that don't usually manifest in December. It's caused by a drought situation. It's caused by there had not been moisture since the end of September. And so you're taking these microcosms of weather change that may or may not be caused by climate change specifically, but as Andrea alluded, you have jet stream changes. Well, in the US, in North America, a jet stream at 25 years ago was a very subtle curve coming across the continent. Well, those extremes now are dramatic ups and downs. And when you get to the tip of that cycle, it creates long-term slowing of a weather pattern. And so you get changes that may happen across the planet that we're not accustomed to. And so it's changing the weather that we know. You may be wetter, you may be colder, you may be hotter, you may have more extreme storms, but it all plays out globally. And as Andrea said, it's not limited to one location.
Well, and I think one of the interesting pieces that we've read a lot about the psychology around climate change, because we're very adaptable. Humans are so adaptable, right? And so we're used to, say, flooding events in a certain location. They happen, but on average, they happened every 100 years, right? That's just the math of it. But what if they're happening every 20 years now? That's a massive increase in the number of events, right? But there's still 20 years in between them. And so people are like, it happens, moving on, right? So because climate change is just like this giant slow cycle, you're not getting a massive storm every year, which would be an indication of a totally different level of change. It's difficult for us to absorb the need to shift our behavior to prevent something, because we're like, well, big storms happen. I mean, they do, right? So I think it's fascinating. I think it's a fascinating interface, right? The way our brains work versus what we actually need to do around this problem is a very, very interesting space.
Absolutely. Now, Janice Hall is asking for more visuals because
I've got some more.
So if you've got more visuals, and in particular, if there's a short film like on the methane issue, that's another huge issue.
Well, I can do that.
Whatever visuals you've
pull
got.
Up methane. That's great.
Well, I've got a 6-minute one. Maybe that's too long. Is that too long?
No.
Okay. All right. Hold on a second. I'm gonna give you guys just some more of what what Oscar and Florian have captured in the last few
that would
days.
be
I'm going to show you guys this while I'm grabbing the methane film for you, because we do have a film. Are you just seeing the visuals, or are you seeing me move around my computer?
Just the visual.
Okay,
just the visual.
That's nice. Okay.
And this is all drones, right?
This is primarily drones. There is a little bit of ground level, but Florian's expertise is certainly in the drone. And so there's more drone than most stuff.
Well, and while she's pulling it up, this team is truly amazing. We are so blessed to have 8 of maybe the most compelling visual storytellers on the planet. And Florian, as Andrea was alluding to, is part of a film that's being released by Disney today, actually.
Oh, is it today?
Yeah, but Florian has been the world drone pilot of the year 3 times. So gives you an idea of the level that we're talking about. And Joshua Hoko is amazing in his wildlife capture. You've got Karsten Ekman, who is on the ground with wildlife and indigenous in Greenland so much. Yuri Belaguchi, Orvar Thorkelsson, Mark Monch, amazing group of visual storytellers. And then we have upwards of 50 contributors that help us tell the story in their specific region or type of footage. So we're incredibly fortunate to have this incredible team behind us that really wants to bring in a visual sense, the literacy of climate change to the world.
Mm.
Okay, so I can play the winter methane film that we did this right before, or actually put it together right after COVID started. And then we ended up kind of being like everybody else on lockdown. So we finally got back out into the field last spring in Iceland and have been working since then and are starting to put together new films. But okay, I'm gonna find the methane. Okay, there we go. So I think it's, I want to say it's 6 or 8 minutes. So hopefully you're
That's
seeing
all right.
Svalbard. Are you seeing
Perfect.
Svalbard? Hold on. Okay, do you see the
There we-
Arctic Arts Project right now?
Yep. Yep.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
Methane, an invisible part of our atmosphere. Methane, like carbon dioxide, is a greenhouse gas. It is far more powerful than carbon dioxide, though. Once in the atmosphere, methane traps 84 times as much heat from the sun for the 9 years it remains before oxidizing into CO2 and water. We hear a great deal about methane from beef production, oil and gas drilling, and from landfills. This methane is created with human activity. In the Arctic, methane is created in the active layer of permafrost. Permafrost is ground that is frozen all year for at least 2 years. Some areas of permafrost have remained below freezing for over 700,000 years. In summer, the top layer, known as the active layer, thaws. The organisms that lie dormant in freezing temperatures wake up and begin to digest the organic materials around them, producing methane and carbon dioxide in the process. Where there is water, the soil is warmer, the active layer is deeper, and less oxygen is available, making lakes, ponds, and streams more likely to bring methane to the surface. We can't normally see methane, but in winter, as high alpine and Arctic lakes freeze, the soil below the lakes is protected from cold by the deep waters, allowing methane production to continue. It flows up through the water and is caught, forming white bubbles in the clear surface of the ice. With colder temperatures, the water freezes to greater depth, and layers of these bubbles form, creating incredible patterns. Methane is made visible for as long as ice remains on the lakes. In 2019, a study found that with less snowfall or high winds, lake surfaces can be free of snow cover. The scientists who completed the study thought this would increase the amount of methane-eating bacteria in the water, reducing the amount of methane released into the atmosphere as the ice melted. Instead, they found that the increased sunlight moving through the ice created the conditions for fewer of these bacteria to grow, allowing more methane to flow into the air because it isn't consumed by the methanotrophs. There are 9 million square miles of permafrost in the Arctic. As the Arctic continues to warm at more than twice the rate of lower latitudes, permafrost is getting warmer too. A deeper active layer brings more CO2 and more methane to the atmosphere. Scientists once believed that these gases were released only in summer months. They expected the natural processes that create methane to shut down in the brutal winter temperatures of the Arctic. In 2020, a paper was published revealing instead that snow falling in autumn on the vast Arctic tundra insulates the active layer. Methane continues to flow all winter. Methane from permafrost poses a significant problem for climate scientists. Figuring out just how much methane permafrost could contribute to global temperature rise has been a difficult task. Different conditions drive different outcomes. But one thing has become clear. Permafrost holds vast stores of methane, and in the warming Arctic, it is becoming a contributor to a warmer world, amplifying human-generated CO2 and methane. To keep the methane and carbon dioxide locked in permafrost, we need to change the energy with which we run our lives. Development of new oil and gas reserves brings only destruction and more emissions. We can drive and fly less. We can power our world from the sun and wind energy that are so abundant. We can reduce the amount of red meat we consume. We can throw less stuff away, particularly food waste, to keep our landfills as small as possible. If we all work toward a sustainable world in our daily choices, we can reduce the methane permafrost contributes to climate and avoid the permanent loss of this critical carbon sink.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
Beautiful.
Hopefully everybody could hear that. I saw a couple things in the chat about sharing the link. If you go to arcticartsproject.com, all of the films are there, and you can take a look at them directly. But Jim will make sure that you and the team also have all the links that they need.
Yes, thank you. And, thinking of the methane, across not only in Svalbard and the Arctic at that level, but across the entire gamut of Siberia and Russia.
Yeah.
The methane is pouring out by the tons. And as you know, there's these methane sinks and places where they're just, you can photograph them bubbling out of the water and fires. And so this is maybe in the end, what does us in is the methane.
Well, we set it free.
We're setting it free, and it's going to do us in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we still have the opportunity, if we can stop putting so much CO2 into the atmosphere and start pulling more out in a meaningful way, we can really slow this process down.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to turn to that, because you emphasize hope and what people can do. As you understand climate change, as you do, what, if you had to prioritize what humanity should be doing, what would it be? We've had people on Humanity Rising that have been saying it's around regenerative agriculture. If we just do the agriculture correctly in a way that creates carbon sequestering naturally, we could essentially solve the global warming issue. There's other people that talk about other things that people and humanity should do, but as you both given your perspective, which is very deep, and you had to prioritize actions for humanity to consider and take on, how would you begin that process if you were kind of dictator for a day and could command?
I want to be dictator. I want to be dictator. No. Well, I have very strong opinions about this because I am in the process of completing a film called The Temptation of Trees. And it is about preserving forests. And I talked with a lot of scientists who are specialists in the carbon problem. And preserving forests and natural systems, allowing these forests, which is an absolutely miraculous carbon capture and sequestration technology we have at our fingertips, allowing these forests to keep growing is the best thing we can do And that isn't just planting new trees, because it takes about 20 years for a tree to start pulling substantial carbon out of the atmosphere. We need to, the trees that are already big, we need to keep them growing for as long as possible. But the other piece of this, which is really critical, which was also just emphasized hugely in the recent IPCC report, is that while we have a carbon problem, we also have a biodiversity crisis. And preserving forests and these natural systems also allows us to protect as much biodiversity as we possibly can, because we will have ecological collapse of a different sort if we don't start doing that also. So that's my number one.
Yeah, and actually, we get that question every day, Jim. And to my response is, we don't have a single problem. There are many, many problems with climate change. Thus, you cannot have one single solution. Yeah. And I think it's the change of mindset that brings us home. How do we take care of Mother Earth in a way that's holistic? It's not in a vacuum. We're going to work on Svalbard. We're not going to work on Denver, Colorado. We're not going to work on Rio de Janeiro. It's got to be a mindset of protecting the forest, changing our agricultural ways, reducing fossil fuel use, change the way we eat. Our eating habits globally are affecting a lot of things. How can we just drill down on one solution or one problem? So to me, it's really all encompassing. We have to look at it in a much bigger perspective in order to solve things on a localized basis. Now, that doesn't limit what we can do, for you at home, because we can. Everybody globally can do something. And it may be just, we're going to drive less, we're going to eat less meat, we're going to reuse plastics or stop using plastics. There's a whole layer of things out there. But we just have to be cognizant of what's going on Earth and really realize that community is everybody. It's not just who's in your neighborhood.
And there are some just fantastic solution people out there, right? I mean, there really are.
Totally.
Ideas around, regeneration are massive. Paul Hawken is just out there beating that drum, which I love. We've got people fighting plastics, which is a huge problem. I mean, there are just incredible people doing this work, right? I mean, we're pushing things in the right direction, and more so than ever before. I mean, I started thinking about this stuff in college, sort of for different reasons. As an artist, I was fascinated by how big a landscape people could alter, right? Like the Aral Sea or the Owens Valley, or these places where we have just completely changed something. And I was doing paintings of that and whatnot, and it all made me really frustrated with the heavy hand of humanity on this place, right? And people did not think about global warming. They thought I was like nuts, and in 35 years, we have come fully, hugely forward on these issues. It's wonderful. I mean, it's good.
Yeah. And I think, Carrie, you're making a very important point, that the problem is global. The problem is integral. And so every choice we make in whatever sector is affecting everything, which speaks to the enormity of the challenge around climate change in relationship to economics, politics, and so forth. But it also makes it more challenging to get a very diverse world that is kind of deconstructing right in front of our eyes, taking Ukraine just as a quick example, social media as another example. So right at the moment when humanity needs to come together in a cohesive, integrated way, we're more disconnected and alienated, not only from the earth, but from ourselves. as ever before. I mean, for example, next week we have a whole 5-day program on democracy, because we have code red in the climate. We've also got code red with regards to democracy, and if we lose democracy, we lose really any capacity to solve the problems at the level that both of you are talking about. And I think that challenge has been accentuated by Ukraine, for example, because government after government is now signaling, well, that's a good idea, climate change, dealing with all that. But right now we've got to get more oil and more natural gas, so that the complexities that we're dealing with are sort of inversely proportional to the crisis that we're being confronted by. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yep.
So the issues around, how do we prioritize? I really appreciated, Andrea, your bringing in the trees and the forest and so forth, and regenerative agriculture. We got to work on plastics. There's plastic oceans
really
out there as big as the size of France.
Yeah.
So as we bring this to a close, I'd like to have each of you just provide a contemplative, almost like a meditation on Svalbard and what you see coming, and what we're in this complexity. Where do you actually really, not just as a matter of rhetoric, what motivates you to hope? Where in this situation do you feel grounded in a realistic hope? Because there's not much out there to hold on to these days.
Carrie, you want to go first?
Well, I go back, Jim, to connecting to Earth, and I'll give you a moment in time that happened a couple of years ago. I was on a ridge in Greenland photographing a full moon rising with some aurora over an ice field, and I was struck by how beautiful it was, but it got increasingly more and more beautiful. I had 2 Arctic fox pups playing at my feet, and then I had a pod of whales in front of me, circling krill and blowholes. And you stop filming at that point because you realize that it's far bigger than one person. It went beyond me. That was a spiritual place for me, because you realize how deeply connected we are. And if it's hope, it's that we need to hold on to that. And those who have never experienced that need to have a chance to connect to it. So that really is what motivates me within Arctic Arts and this incredible team. So,
yeah, beautifully put. The immensity of nature, the intricate symmetry and beauty of its interactivity can be overwhelming when you really open the portals of your consciousness and take it all in. Yeah. That's a beautiful point. I had that moment last week when I read an article of a scientist that has been tracking the way fungi communicate. And we know that they've been communicating, the trees communicate and so forth. But what he was looking at, which was the breakthrough, is exactly how. And so he had gotten everything, and I don't know how these scientists do it, but he got it down to the electrical packets of information that these fungi were sending out to their community. And what he discovered is that the electrical packets of the fungi are structured exactly like human language is. And what hit me when I read that article, because we think we evolved that, And that's why we speak. But it's actually possibly the other way around, that nature has been speaking in discrete language for millions of years, and we can speak this way because the fungi did it 300, 400 million years ago. So it's not that humans have invented language. We're just replicating what nature's been doing for a very long time in a very specific kind of Homo sapien way. And when I had that thought, Carrie, my mind just kind of blew. And I was in disequilibrium for about a whole day. And I couldn't stop talking about this to everybody I was meeting with.
Yes.
So, Andrea, what was it for you, or what thought would you bring into this mix?
I mean, okay, I think what you're talking about and what Carrie's talking about are, I think, the idea that we have enormous hubris as humans, right? Our language is the only way to communicate. Our way of life is the priority. Our young should have priority over the young of any other species on this planet. I mean, we are really self-centered as a species. And what we've created is a situation where the human web dominates in a place, and there are pockets of wildness. And what the planet actually needs to thrive, to continue to support us, is a natural web where there are pockets of humans. And if we can begin to shift, right, so that we have an intact network of nature that we try very hard not to interfere with, I think that's a perspective that can carry us forward for centuries, where the perspective that we have now, our self-centered perspective, is one that has extremely limited utility moving forward. And what moves me always is my beautiful child. I have a daughter. She's 12. Sorry, I'm going to cry. She's going to be on this planet at the end of this century. And she, all these things that I study and read about and understand, she's going to see it. And I want her world to be beautiful. Sorry, I'm a total sappy person about this. But
well, no, I mean, as a father of two sons, I've felt an awareness since they were born that their generation is the generation that's going to reap the whirlwind.
Yeah.
And how we as adults come into a reckoning with that.
But we don't have to give them that.
Yeah.
It's still an option. I mean, it's not for much longer, but it is still an option. We can choose something different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. And my word, you two are two beautiful people, Carrie and Andrea, just the way you radiate such deep compassion for our earth. The way you have dedicated your lives with a precision of both science and the passion of the arts to bring imagery to us today as we consecrate Earth Day has been very profound. And I want to thank you. And I just want to recall for all of us the few moments when our friends from Svalbard were with us in a technically challenged way. But it just shows the intricacy of our interconnections with one another. And so I want to deeply thank you for bringing the Arctic Arts Project to Humanity Rising on Earth Day. It's been very profound, very moving. Very moving.
It's a pleasure to share in conversation with you.
Thank you both. That'll do it for us for today as we commemorate Earth Day, everyone. The Arctic Arts Project, go to arcticartsproject.com. It's a beautiful website. There's other films that you can download around environmental concerns like we saw on the winter methane. This is a beautiful, beautiful expression of the human spirit in the face of imminent catastrophe. And I think it's the beauty of the human spirit that for me on this day brings me hope. So thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy
That
Earth
brings
Day,
us to a
everyone.
close. Happy Earth Day. Bye for now.
Bye.
See you Monday.